All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Ring. I'm president of FAM. Welcome to another edition of our Heart to Heart series. Today's going to be a fun one for me because usually FAM is talking about issues that we're advocating, either sentencing or prison reform. We're talking to affected families about their experiences. This is an issue that's really hot right now and not one that we are subject matter experts in, but we want to get smarter about. And we think a lot of people could stand to get smarter about this before they weigh in on this topic. And so I'm excited to have two experts join us with different views and kick around an issue, policing reform, that is, front page in the news and in, Congress and in the state legislatures as people try to grapple with this issue. And so let me just introduce them first. Dominique Johnson is with the Center for Police Equity, and Arthur Reiser is with the R Street Institute. And I'm going to ask you both just to talk a little bit about your organization and its involvement in this issue. So Dominique, why don't we start with you?
Hi, so my name is Dominique Johnson, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement with the Center for Policing Equity. And we work with law enforcement departments and community and scientists to bring data to make informed decisions around public safety. And so the hope for me from the community aspect is that we are bringing the community to the departments to talk about public safety, and the departments that we work with are allowing us to take their data, show points of equity that need to be addressed, and then community leveraging their power to make those changes happen in public safety and reimagining that. And then we have awesome data folks and scientists and researchers who help us do that.
Awesome, thank you. Arthur? You have to unmute.
And they just gave me the directions on how to do that. My name is Arthur Reiser. I am the Director of Criminal Justice Policy at the R Street Institute, and our organization is a center-right think tank. We focus on, we think the answer to most of our problems is the market, and the more liberty, the better off that we're going to be when it comes to a host of policy issues. This is kind of my baby area at R Street. I'm a former police officer. I served 20 years in the United States Army. Most of that time I was a military police officer. And I'm also engaging on a long-term research project via the University of Oxford. It's been going on since 2014. So 6 years where I'm interviewing police officers around the country. Spent almost 300 hours interviewing officers to try to tackle, what I consider, and we'll get into this, the epicenter of policing issues, which is police culture. And so, I come at this from a place of, I love cops. I want cops to be healthy, and I think we need cops, but, we should expect excellent cops and demand excellent cops at the same time.
All right, well, this is gonna be a great place to jump off. So Dominique, I mean, the headline that took over immediately was defund the police. And there has been, as somebody who cares about messaging, there's been a lot of immediate pullback, right? From some, it's like, no, we mean it. We mean abolish the police. Other people say, no, we mean like what they did in Camden, where they did sort of reimagine how police could work. That's different, I think, than what you talk about reimagining. And other people just say, no, we want to divest because the police are overextended. They do too many things that they're not good at. We want to reinvest in social workers and other things, health experts to deal with drug issues, things like that. Where are you, I guess, on that spectrum when it comes from, from abolition to changing the culture, but largely leaving intact police forces?
Well, as I said before, CPE has 5 different audiences. And so we have to think about the ways in which we intersect our personal views, our organizational views, and how we navigate those 5 audiences, one being law enforcement and the other being community. And so for me, as a young Black woman, I could say my spectrum changes day to day. But representing CPE and the communities that we serve, I think it's about reimagination. For our law enforcement partners who we work with, I know that they want to have the best cops being adequately trained, excellently trained, and prevent Black lives from being taken when it comes to issues of law enforcement altercations or circumstances. What I
Yeah.
would say for the community side of that, though, is that it's really important to reimagine what that looks like. Because when you think about reform, when it comes to what we're hearing, so we have the abolitionists, which I'll touch on in a second, and then we have sort of the defund folk, and then we sort of have reformists. And so when you're thinking about reform, you're automatically assuming that this is something that's worked. And so the history of this country shows that Black people were never designed in the system. So how can you reform something when Black people were never given an opportunity to be a part of the creation of these mechanisms that were distinctly designed to oppress? And so when I think about reform, it gives me heartburn because it's saying that we're going to tinker some pieces and everybody will get the same services and have the same expectations and come from the same heart space. And that's not true. And the data shows that, community voices show that it's there, and we see the systems of oppression that are really disproportionately impacting Black people. And so what I think we would like to move towards is that reimagination where we're investing in Black communities and pulling sort of law enforcement away from having to be the responders of all. You know, I work with different departments and the chiefs are saying to me, you know, we are policing homelessness. We are the mental health folks. If dogs are missing, we're those animal control folks. We are the substance abuse folks. We are the education folks. And it never gets them to be able to do the jobs that they think they were assigned to do, which is protect some of the laws and regulations that are not tied to social welfare, you know? And so if we think about how we can reimagine that and pull some of the budget from the departments, or think about where we can invest them in Black communities and uplift community mechanisms that have already been in place and are working for communities, then we can reimagine our public safety. My concern, and when I talk to communities, is really thinking about who controls those budgets when you do reimagine or reallocate. Do you have enough community supports, and are they trained? And how do we best support uplifting these mechanisms while not taking away from police budgets where we're in the process of reimagining, you know, because you don't want to deplete something and don't have something else propped up. And so I think that answers your question, but I'm happy to dive further.
Well, let me just follow up with one thing before I go to Arthur, and that is, I probably unfairly said to you, you know, where do you stand? Because I think what you said is you try to work with the departments, and I think this is an important thing that you talk about. We want to reflect what the community wants, and not all communities are going to want the same thing.
Yeah, they don't, and so that's where the abolitionists come in, and so they have to be in the conversation. You know, some days I'm like, what does that look like if you abolish police? And it's sort of taking and uplifting those different viewpoints and creating actionable steps. So when community says we want justice, I'm thinking, when I talk to different people in the community, what does that look like? How do we help you actionalize that? And then once we have a plan for that, how do we bridge the gap with our policymakers and our law enforcement to ensure that we are meeting the needs of community for all of us, because we're all a part of community.
Right. And the other thing I think, as somebody who, like, you know, we work on sentencing reform, and we'll say, you know, we don't support mandatory minimums for a certain crime, and then it's assumed then that we care less about crime or public safety. And so I just want to give you the easiest softball I could possibly give you, which is to say, none of the things you're proposing is because you think these things would sacrifice public safety. I assume you think that the proposals would increase public safety and improve community well-being.
Yeah, and then you know, when you're thinking about community knows best. You know, when we talk about CPE and the work that we do, we share that community are our partners. But for me as a director, I'm only here in the background. I'm here to support things that have already been in place, because what people fail to realize is that the people that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so all you have to do is sort of ensure that you are uplifting that and passing the mic and putting them in spaces where they can demand what they're looking for, and helping to just make sure that people are focused on action steps and giving them the data to say, okay, so we've tried this, but then what about this? And so here's the data here, and this is what it says. Because a lot of people are silenced because people don't resonate with emotions, they resonate with the facts. So if we can arm people with the emotions and the facts and bring both parties together, then I think we have a crucial point in reimagining what we hope to be is public safety that is equitable for all.
Well, I'm going to come back to you in a second, but I'm going to push you on this point. So just be ready for this, which is, I don't always think the community always knows what's best, right? And so like, I think we've talked about the community has sometimes said things like body cams or implicit bias training, things that the data hasn't borne out. And so the question is, what do you mix? And Arthur, this will go to you because, oh, we just lost you, Arthur. Maybe somebody's, oh, there you go. This may go to you because I think data and evidence, not that you're discounting that, Dominique, but like that is an important thing. And we can't just say, you know, what do you want no matter what? Arthur, what does your understanding of the data and evidence tell us that we need to do differently? And then, and I'll make it even broader, just piggyback off anything Dominique said about points you want to make. You're muted. Unbelievable. This is your last show.
Listen, I come at this from kind of different perspective as well. I mean, there's my libertarian side of me that wants to privatize sidewalks and thinks that everything that the government does is horrible and evil, and we should be suspicious at all angles. But you know, in being serious, you know, we really do know that policing is a very complex issue, and the way that we've been going about it for years is not getting us anywhere. I mean, Dominique's absolutely right. The very first police departments in this country were slave owners. So to think we can divorce that history from what's going on today is ridiculous. So I try to, you know, come at this from the way I would come at any policy issue. And I ask myself 3 questions. You know, does this promote human dignity and freedom? I don't think the way that we police in the United States today does. Does it make us safer? No, we actually know there's better ways to promote public safety, you know, through different ways to police. And are we being good stewards with our tax dollars? And I think if you look at all of those, the answer is we need to fundamentally change the way we think about policing in this country. And it has to come from a structure standpoint. You know, I talk a lot about police culture, and you know, we don't do a good job of even trying to understand police culture in this country. Most of the research around policing revolves around issues related to police chiefs, and that's important. I'm glad we have a more diverse police leadership in this country, but leadership can't change culture. Or they talk about we need to hire more educated rookies or this different type of police officer. But again, you know, the adage is a few bad apples ruins the barrel. If you keep throwing in bad apples into a rotten barrel, guess what happens to those apples? They get rotten too. And until you fundamentally change the way that we think about police culture, you're not going to go anywhere. And there's things that we can get into policy-wise in this conversation of how we can do that. But I like to use as an example the 1965 United States Army. It was corrupt. Nobody would look to the Army in the 60s and the 70s and say, well, that's an example of what the military should look like. Of course not. It was corrupt. How did we change that? We did it through a fundamental restructuring of how we think the military should operate. And that is the type of thing that we need to do when it comes to policing. You know, as someone who's on the right, our bedrock is supposed to be a limited government. There's nothing worse the government can do to you than put handcuffs on you. And this should be one of our central points. This is where the rubber meets the road when the government comes in contact with the individual. And we cannot pretend, listen, I'm a white guy, right? But my kids are brown, you know, their mother is black. And I know that they see the world in a different way than I do. That is something that we should try to change. Every parent should be worried about that. And so to answer your question, you know, I use the word reform because the word reform means to improve, but I think we need to fundamentally restructure policing in this country, and the way we think about policing in this country has to change.
Well, I don't want to get into agreement just yet because I like when we're disagreeing, but let me try to focus on this then. Dominique, you talk a little more probably ambitiously, and Arthur, though, you use words like fundamentally transform. What functions, Arthur, are you willing to say the police should get out of? How close do you get to where Dominique probably is in terms of they should be out of this? And because I think, I'm not going to speak for her, but I think the point is that there's no retraining, there's no culture changing that is going to make a armed police force the right people to do some of these tasks. And so which ones should we be jettisoning from our police and getting out of that and putting into community structures?
Well, I think it really, we would have to go kind of line by line, but I mean, individuals that that have mental health issues, the police are ill-equipped to deal with those individuals, and we know that. There's communities in rural America that the police officer just chases his radio and goes from opioid overdose to the next opioid overdose. I also think I go even further. I think there are straight-legged policing jobs that we can actually rethink of how police interact. One of the things that I've been saying for the specifically the George Floyd incident is, if that was me, that would not have happened. If that was me with a bill that looked counterfeit, it would have been assumed that it was a mistake. And I know that, Ronnie Lampard, a friend of ours, tells a story about how that actually happened to him. He passed a bad bill on accident. Nobody called the police. And the police do show up. Why is their interaction a violent one? Why are we doing that? So, I can't exactly say what should go into this bucket or that bucket without looking at it. But fundamentally, the police department are supposed to be helpers. And I do think that we could move police into helping, but we have blurred this line so badly in this country where, every police officer has an AR-15 in their trunk, which is a weapon of war, where a soldier's job is to engage the enemy in close combat and destroy them, and then act all surprised that they can't flip a switch and be the protector and the server anymore. Of course they can't. Nobody can do that. Try to fight with your wife, and then have a calm conversation with your kids. It is really difficult, because once you're in that escalated state, it's hard to flip over to something else, and we kind of set people up for failure.
Yeah. Well, we got some marriage advice there too, right? We got some domestic advice there, which is nice. I agree with. I think that's right, and there is this sense. Let's talk about even the way we arm police, right? Like, so in some ways, this might be a myth that I do want to bust, which is we talk about, in other countries they don't have it. Well, other countries don't have 300 million private arms, right? So our police are confronting something different. In London, they're not walking into just full out shootouts. So we do have it a little different. As long as that's the state of play, our police are going to be armed. But then we also have this issue of they don't need tanks and what you were saying, weapons of war. Dominique, how do you view the issue of like the militarization of police and that aspect?
Well, this is speaking from Dominique.
Okay.
This is Dominique. So CPE, don't kill me. But no, this is, it's sort of, for me, I think the big elephant in the room is racism. I think that right now we are talking about systems, and we're talking about police being the conduit right now, or the face of systems that have constantly oppressed Black people and other marginalized communities. And so when you are trying to rationalize that, I think what people are failing to do, and that's why it's so reactive right now, and that's why we want solutions immediately, is that we haven't set in the fact that this country is racist. And so you have to really own that. That's a culture conversation, that's a societal conversation. And I'm not proposing that I have the answers to how we do that or anything, but it's just manifesting in places like policing, in education, in all of these different disparities and inequities. And I think the problem here is that we have used protect and serve to the extreme, but isn't everything that we do here pretty extreme? We're the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we are. And so when you think about that, everything is going to be extreme.
Well, you're going to hear this,
right? And
this response, you're going to hear it because my aunt is in my ear, in my head right now. The Baltimore Police Department, a lot of these police departments are majority Black, right, with Black leadership and Black officers. So knock that one down.
So this is my experience of learning about policing culture working at CPE. So I've always been sort of a community focused person, engagement. And so this was my first time really working with law enforcement. And so I'm originally from Baltimore. And for me, I live in a rural community right now. I'm quarantining at my mom's, which is sort of like a little farm here. And when I see police, I turn the other way. And I work with police, I go out of my way. If I see a police officer, I'm turning down the next street to get to where I gotta go. And the minute that there was a police officer, I sort of rolled through a stop sign, lightly. And he was right behind me. And I'm like, oh my God, today is the day. And like, this is coming from someone who works with really great chiefs and really great line officers. And my boss is a former chief, and my direct coworker that I work with our law enforcement initiatives is a former deputy chief. So I know that there are spaces and places where we would say there are folks who understand policing in the way that they signed up to do it, which was protect and serve. But just because you are a Black officer doesn't mean that you haven't bought into the culture of militarization and protecting your other person. And the training could be, it's either you or me. And so when you're constantly inundated with it's either you or me, that doesn't matter if you're Black or white, it's the culture. So I think those are two separate issues. I think that when you're thinking about culture, yes, that is the question that people will say, oh, Black officers are doing crime as well because the Atlanta incident where the 2 students from Spelman, those were Black officers that were arrested.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right. So people bring that up. And what I say is that look at Black officers. So you have to uphold the policing culture and your Blackness. And so in that space, it's very hard to decipher who you are. Just like me, I have to, walk the walk of community and understand law enforcement when I'm still holding my wheel and like hoping that I don't lose my life.
Right.
So
but so I guess it's saying though that there's
that.
more than race there, then, right?
In this, I think it is, but I don't want to negate the fact that race is not the number one factor in this. I think if anything, you have to really think about how you situate yourself as an officer of color because of the culture that you're in that is designed to be a culture where you protect one another. So it's like the brotherhood, but also, does that include Black people in the brotherhood? I don't know. I'm not a Black officer. I couldn't say, because I'm sure if you interviewed them, they have a different perspective of what that means because they're still Black. And so it's like, I would equate it to when I speak to folks, a Black person being in an organization that's predominantly white. So yeah, you buy into the organization's mission, but at the end of the day, you're still in the corner having coffees with your Black coworkers. Like, did you see this? You saw this, right? Wasn't that a microaggression? So, I really.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Arthur, you brought up race first, and this is an issue where, unlike any other, I don't think you can get away from this. And the reason is because the reaction to police, the idea of reform, the way it made me and my bones feel when I hear abolition and defund, and I think this is the craziest thing I've heard, it's because I have such a different mental picture of who and what the police are than my Black colleagues. So there's so you just can't get away from that. And so I think like, it's almost hard to turn that temperature down to say, are we really having this discussion? And one thing I think distorts it actually is when we allow people to talk past each other. And so I think what's happened with some of the data, this is one of the things I think with the data point is, if you look at police shootings, right? The outlier rare events, that's not going to be the most conclusive evidence. Those are the most high profile, the sort of the newsworthy ones and the most horrific. But that's, what you're going to hear. You're going to hear Heather McDonald say, well, there's more whites who are killed. And that's statistically true. Even Black economists who look at that, what it's missing 100% is the daily grind. It's the being arrested when you didn't do something that, that deserved it. It's being harassed. And so that's what I feel like we're missing in this discussion, because that's what I think whites are not acknowledging that the chief argument is, because that's where the data is too. So I'll stop. What do you say?
I mean, this is such a complex issue. And by the way, Emily Mooney and I have an op-ed specifically on this point, that if you look at just shootings that are all reported, all shootings are reported. You see, yeah, and that's where the Manhattan Institute always points to. But if you look just past that of use of force incidents,
Right.
it totally goes the other direction. And by the way, we don't have really good data on use of force incidents. Why? Because there's no really mandatory reporting on that type of stuff. I would also say, the race aspect is really complex because Black officers actually have a higher use of force rate against Black suspects than white officers do. And why is that? Well, I don't know. It's a very complex issue. Female officers are less likely to use force, but when they do, they're more likely to use deadly force. I think we can kind of figure out why that's the case. But ultimately, it all kind of boils down to these very, very complex issues. But you always can draw a line back to a couple of themes. And one of the themes that I think that is really important here is America has always looked for a boogeyman. Fear drives policy in this country, and we always have someone that we want to point the finger at. And in the 80s and the 90s, it was a super predator. It was the Willie Hortons of the world. And that is where we got and how we got to the place that we were. And I was one of those people. So I know where that comes from. I remember, being that law and order individual. And I remember misusing the phrase, the rule of law. And the rule of law is always used by people, not always, but very often by people on the right to mean, you must obey the law. But that's not actually what that phrase means. What it means is that the law is that the government is subservient to the people. And it's a concept that goes all the way back to Greece. So we have distorted history. We have distorted facts. Why are we surprised that we have these ugliness on the ground? And I listen, I'll say it again. When the rubber meets the road, just think about how this affects different individuals. Poverty plays a huge role in this. And individuals that are poor, individuals that are from communities of color, they just have a different experience. You can call them liars all you want, but it doesn't change the facts. And something that Dominic said that I think is really important is that this is not a legacy issue. This is not something that happened in the past and is no longer happening. You can say, and it is true, that we have better police today than we've ever had. And that is a fact. And I can prove it to you through different matrix. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't, try to still get better. If you have cancer that's killing you, and then you go through treatment and it's not killing you anymore, but you still have cancer, nobody's going to dust their hands off and say, okay, I'm good to go. You still want to, try to fix some of these underlying problems. And we have to get away from this idea that we're going to have the next big policy push is going to be driven by the next boogeyman, because that always gets us in a dangerous place. We saw that in the Clinton crime bill, and we're seeing it happen today across our country.
Yeah. All right. This is good. We're getting there. We're getting there. But now we got to get to, closer, because this is still abstract. And I think there's agreement that the history isn't great, that, the data is mixed and it doesn't make things, easy, and it still doesn't point to a solution. But I want to talk about some of the efforts at police reform. In the past, the things that were, hey, all we need to do, everybody needs implicit bias training because we're all a little bit racist. And if everybody has implicit bias training, that'll help. Do either of you think that is supported now based on the data we have?
I can chime in. So
Yeah.
what I want to say is that when people sort of bash some of these 21st century policing policies, what you're not taking into context is that we're not in a moment where we saw the possibility of dismantling a system. We were not in the middle of COVID-19 that is rapidly killing Black people. We were not in a moment where 43 million people are without jobs. We were not in a moment where we're sitting in our houses or leaving our homes to go and quarantine with others because we have small studio apartments and no space. We weren't in a space where we really could grapple with the realities of the systems designed to sort of place us in have not and have paradigms. And so when you think about that, and then you're home and you watch someone being murdered on video, and then you see someone like an Amy Cooper showing you how if you're not murdered on camera, you're murdered in your workplace because people know how to weaponize their whiteness against you. You're constantly in a space right now in this moment where you're watching democracy divide us so much, and no one is gaining from this but our capitalistic system. So all of these things, when you talk about 21st century policing, we hoped it worked. We would hope it would work. When we have the Trayvon Martins and we have the Michael Browns, we hope that if you present these facts to community and they're like, well, why not get body cameras? We didn't have them before. Well, why not get implicit bias? Maybe people need to realize that they have some microaggressions
Right.
and some racism. So it's not that these things didn't work. It's the fact that they no longer work for our.
Wait a minute. I got to push you on that. My question is not about whether we couldn't do more now, because I agree with you that, it's like the opportunity is there. I just think, why would you spend another dollar on something that the data and the evidence suggests doesn't work, right? Like, so
It doesn't show that it doesn't. It shows that it's not working in the way that communities are asking for. So you have a body camera. Let's say you pose this as, because I've been seeing it on the internet, of sort of some ways to take action now, body cams. Okay, we can do that now. And yes, that's still great, because if we take it away, look at what would happen if we took that away at this point. If we are
Right.
murdering people on camera, if we took it away, we need that to keep going. We need that while we're in the process of reimagination, because you can't just today say, we're murdering people on camera, we're doing this is happening, and then tomorrow every cop is without a job. Like that, just realistically, that is not going to happen. No matter how much people want that to happen, it's not going to happen that way. And so in the meantime, why would you take away things that have proven to increase some sort of transparency and accountability, even if we're not seeing, as Black people, the convictions that we want to see? If you take that away while we're in the process of reimagining, that's detrimental and harmful. Do I think that once we reimagine and have come to different points, that yes, this will be obsolete and we no longer may need these things, and the data may show that it's like only moving the needle a tiny bit? Sure. But in the process of where we're going, you still need to hold up some of those mechanisms that are in place that did move us a quarter or two further than where we were. Because
all right,
imagine.
I'll let you. I'll let that stand.
No, you can push me. You can push me. I understand. It's
I think on body cams, you're right. Like, I think, well, in body cams, right? I mean, some police would say they've exonerated police, right, in cases and all the rest. It's just I guess we're at a point where, you want every dollar to matter if we're going to reinvest. And like, Arthur, if you were going to reinvest, police budgets in something else, maybe it's back into the police. I don't know where you're coming from this. What are interventions that would work in your view? That would improve?
So, we have almost zero incentives in policing for good behavior. I mean, you want to make rank. Okay, maybe that could be one of the things, but there is very little done within the world of policing in order to incentivize good behavior. I mean, just think about what is a good cop within policing. Okay, within policing, a good cop is a cop that makes a lot of arrests. When you're on patrol, a good cop is a cop that has a lot of that does a lot of traditional police work. But that's not today. You want to reimagine policing? Well, let's reimagine what the role of police is. We do not, we talk about policing being a profession. I'm sorry, this is going to probably piss some people off, but there's not a lot you can point to that actually says they are a profession. They're more like plumbers. They have tools. They have a trade. They know how to apply that trade to with these tools, and that's what they do. When I was in the military, every time I made rank, I retired as lieutenant colonel, I went through a professional development course. There's almost none of that in policing, and in the ones they do call professional development. And listen, I've done the research on the ground with cops. The sergeant's course in Miami, it's 2 weeks, almost all paperwork. just teaches you how to fill out paperwork. Most of it is cover your ass type of stuff. That is not professional training. Going back to my example of the 1965 military, how do we change that force to what we have today? Professional development. We did it through systematically developing the NCO Corps, that mid-level management. I ask FTOs, field training officers, which is what my research surrounds, is being an FTO prestigious? None of them think so. Well, almost none of them think so. They don't even think their own job is prestigious. Well, why would we expect them to instill that into the next generation of police officers? We have institutions like qualified immunity, police unions that insulate bad behavior. How can you get rid of a bad cop? Well, ask them. I ask every single officer, do you have bad FTOs? And virtually every single one, out of 52 officers I interviewed, 300 hours, say, yeah, we have bad FTOs. Well, can you get rid of bad FTOs? Nope. Can't get rid of them. So they're just training new rookies? Yep. So how do we ever going to get past that? And it really—
Well, what's the answer to that?
Well, I think we need to fundamentally restructure the mid-level management in policing.
Well, no. I'm not letting you get away with that one.
Yeah.
You know what
I'll
people
tell you,
say, which is you can't get rid of bad police in the thin blue line. They protect each other. That's the
And
incentive.
community is
ask me
not
how
going to
hard it
stand for
was.
that.
You didn't ask me how hard it was. You asked me how to do it. I'm going to tell you how to do it. You fundamentally restructure qualified immunity. That would incentivize police departments. They just can't afford bad cops.
Talk about qualified immunity. Can you just say briefly
Sure.
what qualified?
Yeah, qualified immunity is a made up rule by the Supreme Court that in essence protects police officers from being sued, even in the most extreme examples. I can go more down the jurisprudence of it, but in essence, that's how it kind of works. Right now, there's a bill in the Senate that's trying to restructure what that looks like. I think it's a pretty good one, by the way. And so if you got rid of qualified immunity or you restructure qualified immunity, basically the market would take care of a lot of these problems. The city of Chicago, which has one police officer that I always look into, like every month I go and look at this guy because they track this, has like 60, 70 complaints against him, has cost the city $1 million in lawsuits, but he's still a police officer. How the hell is that possible? You have unions that protect these bad officers. Don't tell me you can't get rid of unions. Bullshit. There's cities right now that just don't allow police unions. Don't tell me it's too hard. If we have good ideas, let's do something about it. You want to professionalize the police force? I'm not one of these people that think the federal government needs to get overly involved. Maybe set some standards. I'm okay with that. But each state should be setting up their own like command staff college for their police officers. Train officers to be professionals. I never, when I was in the Army, ever covered someone for doing something illegal. It was always mission first. But in policing, it happens all the time. And that is a professional problem. The fact that you have officers quitting because they're pissed off that people got reprimanded for pushing a 7-year-old man down, that is unprofessionalism at its finest. Do your job. I understand your job is scary. I understand it's hard. Nobody disputes that. But that is the job of policing. Make it prestigious. Make it something that you recruit the best and the brightest. And that is how we change the structure of policing. Is it going to be hard? Hell yeah, it's going to be hard. But can we afford not to? I don't think so.
Dominic, I'm gonna let you respond because he said a lot, and then I'm gonna get to some questions. I think like everything he's saying though, I'll let you talk, but it just seems like he wants to fix police, and it sounds like you're gonna not say that that's the answer.
No. What I will say is I was nodding my head because these are things that I sort of have conversations with community about, and I sort of had conversations with myself when I'm learning about policing from the folks that I work with. And I think that the chiefs need the agency and the power to be able to do that, because what I'm learning as I sort of work in the spaces with the different chiefs is that it's all political, and where I'm not going to share my coworker's story per se, but he talked to me sort of about an incident when he was a chief, and sort of when people talk about these bad apples and things that you can't do, and it feels, when I think of chiefs, I think, oh, that guy's, it's egregious, fired. And it's like, well, no. And so the public education on this is sort of happening in real time for communities, because they're asking, why isn't Breonna Taylor's, why aren't her, the officers that were involved in that shooting, why aren't they arrested? And so when you don't have the information to know that process, it makes you automatically say, down with police over this, instead of seeing not only what it means to have good public safety, but also the role in which you play as a community agent in that process of demanding good public safety. And so if you're not publicly educating folks on the job of what police officers are supposed to do, if you're not publicly, in departments educating properly on community expectations of what police are supposed to do, and you're not enforcing and holding officers accountable and having mechanisms that are constraining getting rid of the bad apples, then you're never going to be able to bring anybody to the table, because you're constantly, you're on the defense. I think the biggest thing is that for the folks who are in the reform space or the reform idea, is that then you need to be publicly educating folks on what policing, what they do, and then why the rules are the way that they are, why the budgets are the way that they are, and then offering mechanisms to sort of have community input on the processes, the procedures, and the protocols. And if you're not for that, then reform ain't for you. And that means you need to move over to reimagination. And so when I talk to community, if you have already said that no cops, you're not happy with it, move along, then you guys need to be stepping up and demanding that you get the budgets that you need, and you're training the people that look like you and the people that live where you live, and making sure that they are demanding and taking back their money. If you're paying taxes, step up, take it back. So it's, for me, it's always educating people on where they have agency, and then demanding for them and putting the onus on them to take action.
Yeah. Can I add a little contours to that a little bit? So, I agree with everything that was just said. I will say though, and from my experience, you can't change, and I'm going to go back to my word of the day, police culture. You can't change police culture through different chiefs. Chiefs can't change culture. And by the way, most of the policy issues that we're talking about, that's already policy. It wasn't policy in Minneapolis to be able to knee on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That was against policy. What they did to Eric Gardner was against policy. Why did they do it anyways? Because there's no repercussions, which is exactly what she was getting to. If you cannot, I'm not trying to belittle anybody, but think about raising kids. If your kid keeps taking cookies out of the cookie jar and you don't punish them, and you don't do something about it, even if you just stop bringing cookies home, you're never going to change that behavior, because that is what they've done forever. This is not a legacy issue. The only thing that has changed in America is we have cameras that now see what's going on. Listen, I'm a white guy. I do not pretend to understand what it's like to be Black in America, and I'll never get there. But I have a lot of friends. I got kids that are Black, and I hear their stories. And I'm telling you, this has been going on for generations. It's better now than it used to be, for God's sakes. Imagine what it was like. Imagine the horrors of what people went through, Black, brown, and poor people, for the vast majority of the history of this United States. And then ask yourself, can we not do better? Listen, are we a great nation? If we're a great nation, then God damn it, let's do something better.
Well, let me just say this, because I gotta we got some good questions coming in, and there's some like controversial ones, which I like, because I want to hit all the hot buttons. I hate when they're, I don't want anything easy. My bias, I'll throw into the lot, because I'm probably somewhere in between you guys, is I think that like the sociologists are right on this, like giving up monopoly power over the use of force to the government is like one of the greatest inventions in human history, to get away from vigilantism, to get away from, just sort of tribal warfare. And I say that, but what I have learned is that, or been reminded, that is only true if you trust the force that has the power. And I think that that is where the difference in Black and white experience is in America, is that it's easy for me to say, I'm glad the government has monopoly use over force, because then they can referee disputes between people who break the law and do that sort of stuff. But if you do not believe that the government is an honest referee, and that is the history for a lot of Black Americans, then that doesn't work. Then that model doesn't work because you no longer believe the referee isn't on a side. And when you look at the history of slave patrols and the rest, you say, and that wasn't the only history of police, but that is a history of police, is that you're not a neutral arbiter. You're not just the person calling balls and strikes. You're on a team. You're going to enforce, sort of white power, or whatever it is, bigotry and sort of. So I think the key to all of this is, at some point we do want the government to have monopoly force. However much the police does, if we do not repair the relationship between whatever that police force is and the community, though, and I think this goes to the work that you're talking about, Dominique, is it'll never have legitimacy, because there won't be that trust. And then you won't think, I'm glad somebody has a gun and a badge. If you can't believe that those people have everyone's interest in mind, you're never going to be happy ceding your authority to them. Is that right?
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, though, it's a painful point right now for Black people. I'm not speaking for every Black person, but it's a painful point for me right now as a Black person, because I have to work in a space where I'm advocating for reconciliation and trust, and the relationships that I built with chiefs that I know. And I have to sort of bring those experiences with the communities that I work with and that I talk to, and my friends and everything that I do. But then it's kind of contradictory, because at home, I'm afraid of the police when I'm not with my work badge on. And so this is the space in which Black people navigate every day. And I think that if you are not hearing that, and you're not understanding that, and you're not working to actualize that in your practices as an individual white person, or other persons of color that don't understand the need for pro-Blackness, then I think it's all a moot point. And I don't want to be negative about it, or just make it grandiose and conceptual, but I think that it's very difficult right now for people to think about solutions other than tearing down this entire country if you are a Black person. Mm-hmm. And so I work really hard to try to make sure that communities understand that I hear you, I see you, I value you, and I want to work to make this world better. And let's do this with policing. And police, I hear you, I see you. I know that the cops that I've worked with have been great to me. And I know that that means if you are great to me, you in your interactions, you probably are with other people. And I hold that as sort of the truth. What I think the problem is going to be when we're thinking about reform, abolishment, defund, all of that, is that you can't decide when people, one, are fed up. You can't decide how people want to react. And you shouldn't be surprised in the reactions unless you are giving the money and the resources and the fight to those folks. And I just really wish that people understood the pain behind this movement. Because if we don't, and I was just talking to someone, if we don't, at CPE, and for me, and just how I feel, if I don't get this right with community, if I don't support them, if I don't leverage their talents and their voices, this fight may end with policing, but it has the opportunity to move into other spaces and systems. It has a chance to think about the prison complex. It has a chance to think about education. It has a chance to think about mental health. And so as you're moving those folks into those spaces, like, we got to get this policing piece right, because it's the thing right now. And if we can do this right, then we can move into reimagining or dismantling other systems.
I agree. And I think what's so hard about it is it requires acknowledging, though, that difference in viewpoint about the legitimacy of the police. And so for some people, that's why it becomes, I think, a non-starter, right? I think that's why it got hot right away, is because for some people, you might as well have said defund your parents. They'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, like these are the most and best people I know. And so it's the way it's hitting people is differently. And so I think there has to be some growth here in education about that. And my guess is that for, I won't speak for Black communities, it's like, why is it taking so long to understand this? But it is what it is, right?
It's also too, because in this neighborhood, my mom lives in it's a really white neighborhood. We have signs where it's like 1867 historical town. And I'm like, did Black people even live here?
Right.
And so that means I don't see police here. So are they doing their job? What is their job? If you think that police are great, why aren't they ever in your communities?
Right.
Like, why is that the case? So it's not to bash police officers or anything. It's just to say, for those people who are super pro keeping it together and are so against defunding or reinvesting or reimagining, are the police in your community, and how are those responses in your communities? Think about that,
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm the worst moderator of all time, because all I want to do is talk to you guys, and I got to ask them these questions. And I told you, I promised you I was going to ask a hard one, which is, but this is one that's out there, so no one's going to be shocked by this. People look at videos like the one in Atlanta, and they say, he's resisting arrest. Don't resist arrest. And then you hear, oh, that you have to have the talk, that you have to, when the police question you and stuff, show your hands, right? It's the talk that everybody talks about, that Black families have to have and white families don't. But the data even on that isn't great, right? It's like, even when people comply, there's still a higher rate of violence against people. But can you just address that? Because it is something that is out there, that people will say, your risk of being harmed by the police goes down if you comply. But you answer that, Dominique, further if you want.
I think the thing that people are missing here is no one deserves to die.
No.
Like, I don't really care what anyone is doing. No one deserves to die. And so if you are not using protocols that will ensure that people are not going to die, that's a problem, because I don't think anybody would have a problem if he were properly arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct. I'm sure many of folks have been on spring break or been in a bar and been too drunk and had police come up to them, or been called. But what you don't have to fear is that you will lose your life if the police are called, and for any aspect. I worry so much when people mention that they're going to call the police. And again, I say this as someone who works with law enforcement, the best of the best, the people who are seeking us out and asking us to help them create equitable practices in their department and in their communities. Why do I feel this way?
Yeah. Are there, when you so that, this, the incident in Atlanta, I think one thing that is so weird is, like, it's so easy to get caught up in well, he resisted the two, right? He wrestled them. I wouldn't have done that. And then he ran. But is there something wrong with us that, is it the police culture that says, shoot him? Like, so what if he ran away? I mean,
this is,
you got his car, and it's like, what would have been so hard? Like, what was the shooting about? Even if he had resisted arrest, what is this?
Yeah, so two real quick things. One, I'm very uncomfortable with this thing that we do in America, where we try people in the media before we actually know. There's a lot actually happening in that video. So just with that. But what that officer did was within policy. When somebody points at, I was trained in the academy. If somebody points pepper spray at you, or they point a taser at you, you could use deadly force. Because 8% of all police officers, now listen, it's a dangerous job, and nobody disputes that. 8% of all police officers lose their life with their own gun. When you tase the police officer, there's always a gun brought to an encounter with the police officer, at least one, the cops. So that is something to really think about. The bigger issue that I think that you're getting at, which I think is really important, is why do we have to have these violent encounters all the time? Why do they even have to arrest him in the first place? They could have done a summons. They could have done it with George Floyd. We have over criminalized our nation to the point where we have all these interactions with police. And you know what the African American community wants least of all? More interactions with police. So stop creating new ways for cops to interact. And this is not old. Just a few months ago, the Democrats in the House passed a bill banning menthol cigarettes. Who smokes menthol cigarettes? Well, 80% of all Black people that smoke menthol cigarettes. Now, people are going to say, well, we're not criminalizing possession. Bullshit, man, because that's exactly how it plays out. That's exactly what happened with Lucy cigarettes in New York. That was a health issue to try to prevent poor people from smoking because they can buy one cigarette and not others. And then it turned into an enforcement mechanism.
Well,
That's exactly what's going to happen with menthols.
Let me just push you on this issue, because if you look
Sure.
at research on interactions between the Black community and police officers, right? So every time you have a viral video and then the police withdraw and you have a reduction in interactions, crime goes up. So people will say that will be an unintended consequence of reducing interactions. Now, those interactions may produce other bad things, but if you look at what Roland Fryer found in terms of those interactions, like after the Laquan McDonald shooting and stuff, when you reduce those interactions, so is it number of interactions, or is it the types of reactions, Dominique?
Can you
or both?
collaborate? Like, can you articulate a little bit further? Because I want to be able to answer your question thoughtfully.
Yeah. So it's whether you call it the Ferguson effect or not, I don't even know if that's what Fryer calls it. But like after something goes viral and then the police withdraw, and they had interactions between the police and the Black community went down 90% after the Laquan McDonald shoot, after the Laquan McDonald investigation, crime skyrocketed. And so that, so the theory from an economist is that, just scaling back and not interacting is going to produce the unintended consequence of more crime.
I don't know if I agree with that, because crime may have skyrocketed because there are no resources. When you live in communities that are under-resourced, why wouldn't you steal from your neighbor? Why wouldn't you sell drugs if you are under? So it doesn't matter if crime goes up or it doesn't go up because police are involved. The fact is, communities do not have the resources to be proactive and to be advocates for themselves and to create communities that are sustainable for themselves. And then on top of that, you start to criminalize poverty. And when you do that, you're bringing in all of these other unnecessary, stressful factors, and you're creating places where people who are already in high crisis, they're already mad at the system, they can't get a leg up. You get a job, you lose your car, you can't get a job because you got arrested, you lose your job because you can't post bail. You're putting officers into already high pressure point places, and then you're expecting it not to elevate. So if you are bringing officers into spaces where this is already a high pressure point, and then you're training your officers that deadly force is necessary when your life is threatened, it's a recipe for disaster. Yeah. And so then people wonder why everybody is at each other's throats.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're now, because I told you I'm terrible at this, so we're out of time, but I'm going to let everybody give a parting thought. But I think the one thing that is clear, I always try to say, is like, because we do sentencing and policing is upstream from sentencing, so it affects us. But I also think these are all just not criminal justice problems. These are societal problems. So like the best police force and the best jailers and it's like, these are inequities that exist upstream that we have to address because they find their resolution in the justice system. They may be even exacerbated by the justice system, but they exist upstream of that. And when you're talking about poverty and sort of segregation that we're reinstituting in our neighborhoods, those things have to be addressed if you ever hope to address these other issues. But with that, I'm going to let you each finish with any concluding thoughts, something you want to say that I didn't ask you, or something you want to reiterate, or anything. Dominique, I'll start with you. I'm sorry that went so fast.
I feel like Arthur never got a chance. Arthur, do you want to go first? I'm sorry, I don't want to. No. I feel like I talked so much today.
No, you didn't.
Okay. So what I really just want to say is that the Center for Policing Equity is working sort of on all sides, and I want people to understand that that doesn't mean that we don't see a world where it's reform, reimagination, or for some folks, abolishment. You know, we want to be where community wants us to be. We want to be where law enforcement wants us to be. We want to be where the data is so that we can then help both of these different communities understand the viewpoints of others and then push together for a reimagination and better public safety. And so I would just really encourage people to take their power, own it. Whatever space you have agency and you have power, it is your responsibility to make sure that others are getting access and uplifting their voices and their concerns. And whenever you have the opportunity to engage with learning more about what these systems and structures are in this country, you're better for it. And you're better for being next to someone else and sharing that knowledge.
Yeah, and police is so hyper local, right? So you're right,
Yeah.
to get involved. I mean, this is where you got more impact than like federal legislation. Arthur?
Yeah, so I think that don't fall for these false choices that people lay out for you. It isn't either we need to have less contact between police and Black communities or poor people, impoverished individuals. We need better interactions. You know, George Floyd is a great example of this because that did not need to happen. They could have wrote him a summons and they could have went about their way, and that could have been the end of the day. But ask yourself this question: do we need to have a violent interaction to enforce this law? And if we don't, then maybe we shouldn't enforce that law, or maybe we should enforce that law much differently. And I think that she said it perfectly. Dominic is like, are we willing to risk a human life for this? And it's not just the individuals being arrested. Police officers, it's a dangerous job. More police officers are killed from domestic violence encounters than almost anything else. Let's readdress the role of policing, the culture of policing, and the professional of policing. And just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth it. We need to lock arms and expect and demand better results from our cops across this country. And they need to be respected too. It's a hard job, and we all know that. So let's not crap on those people that are out there risking it all. There is middle ground here, and there is room for immediate improvement, but we need systemic long-term reform in order to actually see a major change.
That was really awesome. And I would just say, not to get too kumbaya here, because there are still a lot of differences, but the one thing you guys both bring, and that I think is to this debate, and is a problem in our debates in our country where we don't have this, is proximity. And so,
Yeah.
Dominique, my guess is your view would be totally have been different if you didn't work with police, because now, like you said, I know this, I know my community, I know my upbringing, I know that history, but I also know these police. And Arthur, having been a police officer, but also having the experience you have of seeing it fail, I just think that's the thing, is to lower the temperature, to assume goodwill on both sides, that like we've got to do better than this, and that nobody is seeking to make us more dangerous. No one's trying to, run down a profession. It's just, we all deserve better than that. And so I think your proximity, both of you, to both sides of this debate is what is helpful. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on and giving us this time. And I hope people learned as much as I did, and we'll talk to everybody again soon. Thank you.
Of course. Bye, everybody.